Parrish. Sorry.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I love to see this crowd coming in. This is the first virtual event we've done directly from our bookstore. We're at Book No Further in Roanoke. We're down on the Roanoke City Market. We're the only independent store in the Roanoke and New River Valley offering new and like new books. And we're really excited when we can feature a local author. So earlier this spring, when David came to us and told us about his book, we were more than excited to go ahead and get started. It sounds like I don't really need to introduce David. It sounds like everybody knows David, but for those who may not have met him before, he's a professor emeritus from Virginia Tech in, let me make sure I get this right, crop and soil environmental science in the College of Ag. He went to ETSU. He's a graduate of Wake Forest as well, and from Cornell. And he's done a lot of grants, a lot of writing, books, articles, a variety of things, and some of which I'm sure impacted this book. The book is titled Gyroscope of Life, Understanding Balances and Imbalances in Nature. And I do need to do a special shout out to members of the class of, I didn't ask, Science Hill High School. And
class of 62.
60, oh my goodness, 62.
Yeah.
So I know some of you are on here and we're glad to have you. I'm going to turn it over to David in just a minute and we're going to chat a little bit. First thing I wanted to start with was asking David, why did you decide to write this book and how did you choose this topic?
Well, I decided to write the book initially only reluctantly. My dear niece, Sharon Bowers, who is joining us from Dublin, Ireland right now, whenever we would get together, Sharon would say, write a book, write a book. And I would always protest that, you know, I don't really have anything that I think that the general public would want to hear that much about. And so it was sort of left there. But every time we got together, Sharon would say, write a book. But then Christmas of 2016, my younger son, Nathan, gave me as a Christmas present Hope Yarn's book called Lab Girl. Hope Yarn is a biologist and soil scientist. And she wrote about her personal dealings with science. And about halfway through that book, I thought, you know, maybe there is an outlet for scientists to talk about things that non-scientists would like. So that became the impetus for writing the book. Began writing the book in 2017, and we finally have fruition, as it were, of that book now that we're almost halfway through 2020. So it's been a drawn-out process, but a very enjoyable process for me anyway. One of the things that I would like to do right now, Dolores, if I may, so I can get this funny looking structure out of the way here and get the camera a little closer to me, is to demonstrate what a gyroscope is. Gyroscopes were a favorite toy of mine, but I'm not sure if all my readers, or hopefully potential readers, are familiar with gyroscopes. So I brought in one and I would like to show you what it is. It's a toy. Now, gyroscopes have other purposes, and I'll talk about that later, but gyroscopes are just a toy that have a wheel that can be spun, and then as long as that wheel is spinning smoothly and rapidly, we can get some very interesting. All right. This is the trick. Getting it on there. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, that's why I brought a second gyroscope, because I knew I would have that problem. And we'll try that same trick in here. What I'm trying to do, there's a groove on the bottom of this point right here, and I'm trying to get that to mount onto this string right here. I'm going to take my glasses off. I can see a little better without them, actually. And let me try this one more time. This is second attempt at demonstration of the gyroscope. I think I've already messed it up. Nope. That, folks, is the beauty of a gyroscope. As long as that wheel spins smoothly and is balanced, then this device can maintain its balance. So it was that joy of gyroscopes, if you please, that I experienced as a kid that occurred to me one night during the writing process. That would be a beautiful metaphor for explaining some of the phenomena, the processes that go on in life. So now I can get this out of the way here. And Dolores, I'll let you come back with your next questions.
All right. If you would tell us,
Hey, that was good, David.
Thank you, George.
if you could just tell us a little bit about what's your motivation for writing this particular book with this topic, maybe a little bit about your process and who was instrumental in helping you with the book.
Okay. I called the book my love song to biology. I fell in love with biology when I took my first biology course back in high school, and I majored in biology through 3 degrees in college, and I just found it to be a fascinating, fun sort of field. And my goal in writing the book was to try to take that love, that passion, and see if I could pass it along to non-scientists. I hope that scientists will enjoy reading it as well, but the goal really is to try to destigmatize, if there is any stigma to science, the biology of science of biology, to destigmatize that and to have people enjoy learning about this field of biology. Tell me what your other questions were, Dolores. You asked 3 questions, and I've broken down the first one, I think.
Okay. What was your process, and who was instrumental in helping you get going with it?
The process was long and laborious. I've already told you that I started doing this over 3 years ago. And I went in fits and starts. I did an initial version of the book that I called Plant Philosophy, a play on the term plant physiology, since I was trained at the PhD level as a plant physiologist. But that book, I realized after I set it aside for a while, really suffered from not bringing in examples from the zoological side of the field. And so I, after leaving the project for 5 or 6 months, came back to it and expanded the coverage to include a lot of interesting stories and facts from the animal side of biology. But in the process, I had to lose a lot of words too. Otherwise, this thing was going to become a tome. A lot of verbiage has been left on the cutting room floor, as it were. But I was now feeling better about the coverage of biology. But I set the book aside again, or actually, truth to be told, I sent it out at that point to see if there would be any nibbles from publishers. And there were none. Well, there were some kind comments, but we didn't get past that. So after having it set aside for several months, I picked it up again and realized, as I was reading that version, what amounted to really the second version of the book, as I was reading that version, I realized that, I'm doing a lot in here that's not really science, or at least I'm talking about things in a fairly non-scientific way. I coined the word autobiologic. It's just a mashup of auto from the Greek for self and bio from the Greek for life and logic for reason. But what I realized was that as I was writing about these biological principles, I was beginning to do some sort of blue sky kind of thinking, going off on riffs that were more about what might have been or what could be, rather than what we had actual data for. But I still wanted to put those things in there because these are, in my opinion, fascinating things about the field. But I coined the word, as I said, autobiologic, and then I used it in my third and final version of the book throughout the book, using it not only to talk about the things that I did or I was writing about. I would label those things as autobiologic or autobiological, but that was just to keep me out of hot water with with real scientists who would say, oh, that's not science. Well, it may not be. But I would counter argue, if people wanted to argue, that autobiologic has been around in biology at least since the time of Charles Darwin. He was great at using, in my opinion, he was great at using autobiologic, especially as he developed his ideas about about the origin of species. So I think autobiologic, even if that term hasn't been used always, is a reasonable understanding of how we approach knowledge in biology in particular. Have I run on enough, Doris, about that?
That was great. Why
Thank you.
don't you read a little bit from the book for us?
All righty, I would love to. I did bring a copy of the book. By the way, maybe Christy Mackey is out there. If she is, Christy did the cover art on the book, and thank you, Christy, for that. I'm going to read you about 10 minutes worth of parts from the book, so little snippets here and there, and try to give you some sense of where we're going with some of these topics. I'm going to take my glasses off. I really can see better without them, so please excuse me for getting so informal here. This is from chapter 1. Every chapter, by the way, starts out with a quotation from somebody or other, and so does chapter 1. Chapter 1 starts out, some people are born on third base and go through life thinking they hit a triple. Barry Switzer, author of that line, is more famously known for his days as a successful football coach. It is interesting then that he drew his mini parable from baseball. If he had drawn it from football, he might have said, some people are born on the opponent's 25-yard line and go through life thinking they ran the kickoff back for 75 yards. He made a good choice. The Pig-Iron version just doesn't have that pithy metaphoric ring. I was born on third base, and it was a triple that put me there, just not one that I hit. Rather, I had hit the jackpot, a hat trick, a trifecta. I was born white, male, and American, in an era when each of those attributes provided me major advantages. How lucky was I? There were about 138 million Americans when I was born in late 1943. Of those, essentially half were male, and close to 90% were white. With an estimated 2.4 billion people on Earth at that time, the math reveals that I was the beneficiary of a triple birthright shared by only 2.6% of the planet. And then from a later chapter, this one called House Rules and Theatrics, I start out the chapter talking about Mother Nature, or using her name frequently. And this is a short section where I sort of zero in on whether or not I should be using that term. The notion of a female deity who oversees the earth and its creatures is found in the traditions of many people. In ancient Greece, she was Gaia, Mother Earth. In Roman times, she was Terra. In other cultures, similar goddesses played a maternal role to living things in their environment. While I'm at best agnostic about an earth goddess, invoking such a being has a literary appeal. Hereafter, I will call her Mona, a nickname conjunction of Mother Nature. Mona is not a stereotypical mother, not a particularly protective nurturer. From all indications, she's more like a tough, crusty, and uncompromising stage manager. No mollycoddling, no excuses, no second chances. She plays no favorites. To all of her children, she says, these are the house rules. Screw up, and your history. If Mona wrote fairy tales for her children, the Goldilocks story would go something like this. Goldilocks goes into a bear's house where she finds the porridge too cold, the chairs are too big, and the beds are too hard. And then the bear eats her. The end. Moral of the story, the environment is what it is. Live with it or die. From a later chapter, this one titled Dead or Alive, and in this chapter I try to build a case that that's not really a binary. There are things that are neither dead nor alive. From this chapter comes this section. Besides being a fascinating toy, gyroscopes serve serious purposes. In airplanes, they are the heart of instruments that keep track of the horizon. In space telescopes, such as Hubble, gyroscopes keep the optics pointed steadily at things far outside the solar system while the telescope is moving through its Earth orbit and Earth is moving through its solar orbit. The physical principle behind a gyroscope is angular momentum. Once the motor is set, it will tend to stay in that orientation. Flywheels that are heavier, better balanced, and spinning faster provide greater stability. Something of a similar nature, a metaphorical gyroscope of life, stabilizes or preserves life in cells. Nothing is actually spinning, but processes are in motion that keep the cells stable and pointed in the right direction toward maintenance, growth, and reproduction. And then from a chapter that is entitled Male or Female, and in this chapter I try to make the case that, again, we are not dealing with a binary condition or factor, comes this section. The gender of some reptiles, and occasionally some birds, is determined by the temperature at which their eggs incubate. Some fish can switch genders under changing environmental or social conditions. Clownfish, of which Nemo is the most famous, develop a social hierarchy with a female at the top. If she dies or disappears, a male fish can change gender and become the new egg-producing matriarch. That sort of transition could make Nemo particularly hard to find. Another fish found on coral reefs, the wrasse, does the opposite. A dominant male wrasse will collect a harem of females. If he dies or disappears, the largest female will change gender and take over as the head of the seraglio, to include producing sperm to fertilize the harem. The transition from egg-producing female to sperm-producing male takes him about 10 days, some serious gender bending. And then from the final chapter, excuse me, comes this first paragraph, and then I'll read you some from toward the back of it. Chapter 5 laid out the 3 house rules Mona imposes on all her children, 3 requirements for remaining an actor on life's stage. What can we say about our own species and how we are faring on the stage? We clearly are doing well with regards to house rule number 3. We're making oodles of babies and thereby passing along our DNA. That's house rule number 3. That same piece of evidence establishes that we are collectively handling house rule number 2 nicely. We are keeping our species entropy low. What about house rule number 1? Fitting our environment, the ecological imperative. That's not so easy to assess. The ecology of modern humans is unlike that of other species. We have a distinctly different relationship with our environment. And so from later in the book, we're going to get into how our relationship with our environment is so different from that of all other species. This comes from a section, by the way, that says, if we have gone wrong in Mona's view, how did it happen? We can assume that our hominid ancestors fill distinct niches in the ecosystems to which they belong. Everyone simply fit in, and the ecosystem's gyroscopes were stable. Mona was happy. But at some point, pre-humans developed technologies that gave them an edge over other species. The oldest known hominid tools date back 3.3 million years. Tool making started us down a technological path that has now widened into a superhighway. The tools and weapons of early humans became increasingly sophisticated. That gave the tool makers an increased ability to defend themselves and to become more powerful predators. With those tools, they would have been able to carve out new niches for themselves. This introduced a dynamic that Mona, remember Mona is mother's nature, This introduced a dynamic that Mona had never dealt with, not by biology or evolution, but by dint of technologies. Humans were adapting to their environment. Learning how to use fire to warm themselves and cook food provided another highly significant technological advance. It seems only the human brain is nimble enough to realize that fire is not just to be feared. Some suggest that control of fire is the invention that made us ultimately human, and that milestone was passed at least 1.5 million years ago. With tools and fire and bigger, smarter brains, humans became Mona's version of the terrible twos. Then the wise humans, and that's what Homo sapiens means, appeared about 200,000 years ago. The first members of our species presumably inherited the technologies from their forebears, and then they laid language on top of that. Evolution provided Homo sapiens vocal mechanisms to produce distinctive sounds and brains that could interpret those sounds to mean objects, actions, and even ideas. Now we could talk and talk back. We were becoming teenagers. Then the path of technology broadened again some 12,000 years ago. At that time, when human numbers were still only 4 or 5 million. The new technology was agriculture, teasing food out of prepared ground. Then, just 250 years ago, with still less than 1 billion of us on the globe, the Industrial Revolution essentially turned the road of technology into an 8-lane highway. With rapid technological advances in food production, manufacture, medicine, transportation, communication, etc., the number of travelers on this superhighway increased in just a quarter millennium by more than 7-fold. There's no doubt that our technology can support today's 7.7 billion humans. We are living proof, as it were. But one doesn't have to drill down too deeply into the numbers to see that many of us are living on the edge, with close to 1 billion going to bed hungry every night. And if you look at the first sentence again, you will see that I say technology can support 7.7 billion. I did not say sustain. There are very serious concerns about the sustainability, the foreverness of many of the technologies we employ, agricultural technologies included. So there you have 10 minutes or so that picks out a few parts of the book and give you some idea of how I'm tackling these topics.
Okay, David, what I thought we could do is chat a little bit more, and while we're doing this, if you have a specific question, put it in the chat function, and we will let David take a stab at it. One of the questions we've already had from your friend George is whether what's your earliest memory having to do with nature that made you want to learn more about nature?
Thank you, George, for that question. Well, I was raised in semi-rural Appalachia, born in East Tennessee and spent my first 20 plus years in East Tennessee. In the places where I lived, the outdoors was just always there. I grew up in the little town of Norris, Tennessee, and even today, Norris still has a lot of open spaces. In the middle of town are wooded places and nice open parks and little ponds and lakes and other things that one can get out and enjoy being outside. There was no problem in those days, by the way, with having to spend all our time inside watching videos. We had this wonderful outdoors that we got out to enjoy. And later on, when we moved to Northeast Tennessee in Johnson City, we again lived right on the edge of town. And all I had to do was walk across the back fence, and I was literally stepping across the city line. And there was lots of neat things to do in that area. It wasn't just semi-rural. As soon as I stepped across the fence, I was in farm fields or in forest and so forth. And so growing up in that environment just, I think, naturally gravitated to the outdoors, to nature, learning some things that were essential. You know, you needed to learn to identify poison ivy and avoid it, and learn about which snakes were to be avoided if you could. I learned how to tree ride. I don't know, some of our listeners may know of what tree riding is. It's probably not very environmentally conscious these days, but what we did as kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, anyway, would be to climb up trees, small trees no bigger than the size of your leg, but you climb up in these trees 30, 40 feet high, and you grab hold of the stem of the top of the tree at that point, and then just throw your legs out into space, hanging on for dear life. And if you've made a good decision on what tree that you are hanging on to, you can ride that tree to the ground. It makes a pretty exhilarating ride, actually. You learn pretty quickly you need to let go when your feet touch the ground. Otherwise, you get hoisted back up into the air by the resiliency of the tree, partway back up in the air, and then you have to figure out some other way down. But you learn about nature, and you learn a little bit about trees. You don't want to do this with a poplar tree, for example. Poplars are, their wood's a bit brittle, and you could have some, well, you just learn by experience, if you don't know otherwise, to avoid poplars. Similar for pine trees. Pine trees tend to be kind of, well, they have that pitch, that tar stuff on them that makes your hands and your clothes kind of messy. So, you know, I was just raised in the outdoors in a sense, and have always loved it. Have continued to be a lover of the outdoors into my adult life and now into my dotage.
All right, we have another question here from Mary French, excuse me. She says, what did you learn about yourself as you wrote this book and rethought your Appalachian roots and scientific training?
Whoa, Mary. By the way, Mary is acknowledged in the front end of the book. I don't know if she knows that, but Mary read this book, or read the manuscript in an earlier version, or in a near final version, and provided me some nice feedback. So thank you, Mary.
Well,
and Dolores, please read me her questions one at a time again. My mind is getting too old to hold all those questions up in the air. So just read those one at a time to me, please.
Okay. What did you learn about yourself as you wrote this book?
That's a good question. What did I learn about myself? Well, I simply confirmed that I love biology. And I also realized in the process that I was going to start out and write this book just off the top of my head. I mean, I knew all this biology. After all, I had 3 degrees and all that stuff. And so I thought I could just sit down and write this thing off the top of my head. But the more I got into it, I had to face up to the fact that not only did I not know it all, but there was a lot of stuff that I just was new. It wasn't there for me to learn when I was coming along and in my formative years. So what I had to do was to face up to the fact that I had to do a lot of research. That turned out to be fun. Thank God for Google. But I spent a lot of time just learning more examples of the various principles, ideas that I wanted to get out there. And so I had to face up to the fact that, well, or I learned about myself, Mary, that I didn't really know it all, and I needed to go back to the books a little bit. So that we'll say that's at least one thing I learned about myself. What were Mary's other questions, Dolores?
She also asked about how it impacted the way you think about your Appalachian roots, and I think.
Yeah. Another good question. I've been conflicted, I guess, about my hillbilly heritage. At one point, I was, I think, very consciously trying to avoid talking hillbilly or sounding like I was from East Tennessee. But I've come to be proud of it. I still don't talk like they do back there in the hollers anymore, but I could. The thing is, I acknowledge, and I talk about this in the book, I acknowledge I am a part of all I have met, and a very much part of those who I grew up with, and the mores and the customs that I grew up with. I had to grow past some of them, and thank God I have, but others I'm still very proud of. So I think just in sum, I would say that, I'm proud to be a hillbilly.
Okay, we've got one here from Ed Pert, and it's, he says, I know you tracked local phenological events as you regularly fish the New River. Did you include any of that information or your insights from doing that in your book?
Hey, Ed, thanks for the question. No, I don't talk about that in the book so much. I do observe that just anecdotally. I see things happening sooner in the spring than and lasting later into the fall than they have. But no, I don't really talk about that. I do believe, though, that global climate change is real. The climate disruption is real. I think that there are biological consequences that are easily documented that suggest that what we are doing to the planet by way of by turning up the thermostat the way we are is not serving us or the rest of life well.
Okay. Another question from Mary. In light of the coronavirus, have you thought how changes we are experiencing would fit as another chapter in your book?
Yep. Actually, there is in the very last revisions that I made, I put in a parenthetical paragraph that is specifically about COVID-19. And there I tried to make the point that, well, what we could be looking at is simply Mother Nature's, Mona's way of taking care of overpopulation. But I didn't want to go hammer on that too heavily. But I do see ways that if I were to start to write the book right now, that COVID-19, what we're experiencing, what we're learning about the biology of how the virus spreads and so forth, could very readily be woven into major topics that are already there. I'm sorry, Dolores. I'm hearing you upstairs, but I'm not hearing. Okay, now I hear you. Go ahead.
Dolores was muted.
Okay, I had the wrong button. Okay.
Okay.
In your chapter there where you talk about Mother Nature and immortality, should we, if that's her preference or the way she favors things, should we really worry about losing every species of little critter or bug or even how that impacts us?
Good question. Well, in that chapter on mortality and versus immortality, I try to make the case that Mother Nature would seem not to like immortality. We all are going to die at some point. Every living thing is going to die unless something happens in the meantime. Every living thing is eventually going to die. That's just part of biology, of life, is death. But Mother Nature does provide a certain measure of longevity, if not immortality, to her children who we can speak of as species. And in regard to species, the thing that is equivalent at species level to mortality is what we call extinction. I think Mother Nature really is in favor of extinction as well. At least she certainly gets along very well with it. Somewhere in the book, I build the mathematics for extinction and suggest that 99+% of every species that has ever lived is extinct. That fewer than 1% of everything that's ever been alive is now at the species level is now alive. So I think Mother Nature likes turnover, but I think also she has built-in resilience to life so that life goes on. It's just that she likes to see new players appearing on the stage, and we're seeing turnover, but we're seeing new and improved versions of life as long as Mother Nature gets to have her way. We are unfortunately doing our dead level best, it seems, to interfere with her plans for some of her species as well, causing their extinction against her better judgment or wisdom, I think.
Okay, next we have Pete Davies wants to ask a question.
Okay.
Well,
Are you there?
Actually, David, I didn't want to ask a question, but I wanted to comment, seeing as you were talking about your Appalachian roots. And as you know, you came to Cornell and you had this desire all the time to get back to your roots. And I think I probably said to you, oh no, you know, the chances of you getting a position in that region are going to be pretty small. And you should look elsewhere. But I think you were determined. You decide you want to go back to where you came from, and you didn't quite make East Tennessee, but you made it. So well done.
Well, thank you, Peter. Peter, by the way, folks that are listening in, that's Dr. Peter Davies, my major professor when I was working on my PhD at Cornell back in the early to mid 1970s. Peter, I really appreciate you. Thank you for saying that. Although I still say Appalachian and not Appalachian, I'm sorry.
Okay, editorial comment around here.
Sorry, David.
And if you need to.
Sorry, David, I come from across the pond, so.
That's true. We could tell, Peter.
You've got to forget all these terms.
Well, what we say here is if you don't pronounce it right, we will throw an Appalachian. You can remember it that way. Okay, we have a question from, let's see what we have next. Okay, this is from Peter, and it says, why do you think there's such opposition to science with respect to genetically engineered crops and seeing that they increase yields and enable the reduction of pesticide?
I think the question, well, I'm going to make the question broader than that. I think there's just general opposition to science, period. Unfortunately, there's an anti-intellectual, anti-science movement that is afoot in this country and maybe other parts of the world as well, that scientists need to really face up to and deal with maybe more effectively. With regards specifically to GMOs, and there is a good deal, of course, resistance to the use of GMOs as part of our food supply. I think, quite frankly, the jury is still out on that. I think that there is potential for, I know there's needs to be concerns there, but I think there's potential for harms that could be done there that we just don't understand about. What I say in the book is I don't feel qualified to comment on GMOs, but then I did go on to say that I think that we probably understand about as much about the consequences of use of GMOs as we do about managing ecosystems. And if you go back a couple of chapters, you'll see that I feel that we don't know squat about managing ecosystems. So I think we've got a lot to learn about how we manipulate plants and animals to our benefit, hopefully only to our benefit.
All right, we have a question. It's kind of a combination from Greg Evanilo, I guess, and Brian.
Evanilo, Greg, a colleague of mine. Hey, Greg, and Lisa.
Okay. And also with Brian Murphy, just the whole issue of anti-science sentiments and the increasingly ignorance among a lot of people about science. What do you think is the ramifications or what we can do about it?
I'm hoping this book, for example, can do something about it. I hope that people who read it who might have some mixed feelings or even anti-science feelings would see that science is not something to be feared, not something to be dissed, that it's just a way of trying to understand the universe and phenomena that go on in the universe, whether it be the Big Bang or black holes or the way a cell maintains its life. Science is an approach to trying to understand those sorts of phenomena. It's sad, it's disturbing, it's discouraging to see people reject ideas just because they come from science, just because they came from somebody in an ivory tower. And I know that's me. But I think there's a pendulum that's been swinging. I'm hopeful that we've gotten to the limit of its rightward swing. Can I say that? But we've gotten to the point where maybe that pendulum will start to come back, because certainly there was a time when we as a society were just all in, better living through chemistry. That predates World War II. But we were at one point quite ready to be enlightened by and our lives made better by what comes out of science and out of technology.
Okay, I'm going to have a question here from my colleague here in the store, Swade Best. He wants to ask a question.
Yes, Swade.
Hi, David. So I think about 2 months ago, Giorgio Agamben, who's I think an Italian philosopher, in response to the coronavirus, put out an essay talking about how, in his opinion, science and medicine is becoming as dogmatic and powerful as religion, right? Sort of that science and medicine is taking over the place of religion as its own sort of dogma, right? Almost like sort of the idea of the death of God in Nietzsche, right? That the new God is science. And so I was wondering, as someone with a pretty intense science background, how you would respond to sort of that assertion.
Thank you. I talk about science and religion in the book a lot. I was raised a fundamentalist Christian. I grew up believing that the earth was created some 6,000 years ago in a literal week, and that everything about the earth and about the universe was a supernatural product. I evolved away from that thinking. Science and religion don't need to be arguing with each other because they're coming at their view of the universe from two entirely different perspectives. Scientists are trying to understand the universe to explain phenomena that are occurring in the cosmos using cause and effect connections. They are trying to use physical principles to explain what's going on. Whereas religion, mysticism, is relying on the supernatural, is relying on the metaphysical. They are dealing with the metaphysical universe. And in my opinion, those two don't need to be butting heads against each other. The metaphysical versus the physical. It's okay for people who study the Bible or the Quran or the Vedas or any other mystical writings. It's okay for them to have their metaphysical notions about how things came to be and how things are running today. Equally, I think it's very legitimate for scientists to have their own physics, chemistry, biology-based view of how the universe and life operates. but they're coming at it from an entirely different perspective, the physical universe versus the metaphysical universe. The two are not like yin and yang, in my opinion. The two are more like matter and antimatter. They just simply can't exist, shouldn't try to exist in the same space. So in my mind, I've resolved the science versus religion problem by saying, it's not a problem. People who are into religion, who are into metaphysics, are certainly entitled to their own view of how things operate. And I will not argue with them. And I would hope that they would not choose to argue with me if I want to come at this from the angle of, well, what's the biology, the chemistry, or the physics that explains what's going on or has happened?
Okay, we've got one more question that is somewhat related to that. David Brown asks, are the acts of man nature? Many people see the works of man, cities, technology, etc., as being not a natural thing. Do you agree with that, or how do you think that plays into the whole science versus religion question?
I'm sure it can. Oh, hi, David Brown, by the way. David's a former neighbor, now living on the other side of Virginia. The section that I read out of chapter 10 a while ago sort of alludes to this. My take on it is that we, human beings, are unique amongst all of Mother Nature's, Mona's children. Because of our intelligence, because of our dexterity, and are able to make tools out of rocks initially, but then going on beyond that to begin to make jet planes and everything else that we now enjoy technologically and scientifically. Human beings are just in a completely different ballpark as far as how we interact with nature, with the rest of life, and with the inanimate portions of the universe as well. And my sense is that our technology has taken us, our ability to use technology and to do it with such abandonment, to do it so successfully, to bulldoze down rainforest and to create parking lots that cover hundreds of acres, and all the things that we look around and see our species doing. I just don't see that as natural. I'm sorry. I don't think Mother Nature, I don't think Mona sees that as natural anyway, either. I think that it's just not right or reasonable to call human activity natural. Not since we stopped being hunter-gatherers. Back 200,000 years ago, when we were first human beings, we were just out there acting in those ecosystems the same way every other animal or plant did. We were just part of the ecosystem. We were part of that spinning wheel that kept that gyroscope balanced and those ecosystems running smoothly. But then somewhere along the way, we jumped the track as far as Mona is concerned anyway, I think, to the point that we are now not like any other species, for lack of a better term. And to me, that makes us less than natural anyway. I'm not saying it's bad. I mean, thank God we've got some intelligence, and thank God we have some opposable thumbs. But Mona is not able to deal with us because of our, after all, look where we live. We live in Antarctica. We live under the ocean. We live out in space. These are not places that we are biologically fit for. We're not adapted to those environments. It's only because of our technology and our ability to take livable environments to those locations. It's only because of that we find ourselves in those places. So we're just not natural, David. We're unique. And I think Mother Nature, Mona might be willing to say we're off in our own category, and that's not necessarily natural.
Well, we're about to the end of our time, so if you have some final thoughts, and then the one thing I'd like to do, since this is a little bit of old home week here, we're going to leave the chat function on for a little bit and unmute people. If you guys want to chat for a little bit, you'll have to kind of fend for yourself on who talks first, but we thought we'd leave this open and let you have a little bit of discussion amongst yourself. Do you have any final thoughts, David, you'd like to share?
Only that I hope folks who read the book will read it with the notion or with the idea that this is a love song to biology. Well, biology is so neat, so cool. Life is so fantastic. It seems to exist almost in spite of everything that we are now able to do. But I also think that life is very resilient. I hope that we can get past the stage where we are now of doing things that are so anti-life in a way, and that we can get back in sync with Mother Nature, that she will rebalance those gyroscopes if we'll just let her. Thank you, Dolores, by the way, for hosting us.
All righty, and thank everyone for participating. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Dr. Parrish's book, you can go to booknofurther.com and we'll get one out to you. And now we'll open up the microphones and you guys can chat if you want. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you ring off, that's fine. But if you want to stick around, I'll be here.
Everybody.